Well, good morning, everybody. If you're on the West Coast of North America, good afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and good evening, Keith and everybody else in the UK and Europe. And to Hector and all my friends in India and the Middle East who are staying up late to watch this, thank you very much. And Hector, thanks very much for joining us. For those of you who have not been on one of the SafeConnection expert panels before, the whole purpose of these panels was to provide, if you will, more of a ground roots reality perspective versus theoretical. Both Keith and I get to hear many speakers, thought leaders, some great new ideas. And unfortunately, although it's a good thing that there's so many new ideas out there, it also gets to be a little difficult for everybody who doesn't have access to go to every conference and seminar to sift through it all and say, okay, but what really works when you get down to the ground level? Because in theory, lots of things work and lots of theories and models pan out. So that was the reason, everybody, or the basis for these panels. It was actually at a conference that Keith was an MC with, where the speaker, it's his point of view, but he was basically saying that he thought that safety 24/7 and family days and things like that were a waste of time. And as you can all imagine, those of you who know me, I couldn't keep quiet about this. And later on, I was talking to a corporate safety director, major Fortune 500 company, global, all around the world. And he just looked at me and he said, Larry, he doesn't have to live with it. Meaning his advice. He doesn't have to live with it. He can just ride off on his horse and go off to the next place. And I'm looking at the man's name is Michael Cook. And I just looked at him and I said, exactly. I said, I think people would really like to hear from folks like you, Michael, in terms of, after sifting through all this, got 150,000 people around the world. What do you really do? Now, some of these topics have been a little more, if you will, practically oriented, like some of them we did on COVID. It's not over till it's over, and just helping people with very specific things around the pandemic. But we've moved on to subjects, issues, and problems that have been much more persistent and still haven't gone away. So that brings us to today. And today's topic is production versus safety, ancient myth or current reality. And safety's come a long way, but have we really conquered rushing? So just before I read the whole intro, everybody, and set the stage, let me, if I can, just introduce very briefly the panelists that we've got on the show today. I'll get them all, if you will, to give you a little elevator speech about their company, the projects, what they're doing. Hector is looking after an incredibly big project in India, and I've actually been on site in Batindra at his place. Excellent safety, and the culture there was for real. Hector is the manager of construction for HMEL, and in Batindra, India. And I could explain a bit more about this Batindra, India business, but I counted, Hector, after I was there for the 3 days, 1 in 20 people will be wearing a motorcycle helmet in Batindra. And they've managed this project. They've managed this project to virtually zero harm. So it's going to be very interesting hearing about Hector's perspective in terms of production versus safety and being able to balance all of this. To my right on the screen, I'm not sure where it is for you, everybody, is Keith Hole. And Keith Hole is from the United Kingdom, from England. I met Keith as the MC for GLC. They put on safety conferences as well as other conferences in Europe. They do an excellent job with it. And um, Keith, I just had Keith on the Larry Wilson live show talking about theory versus reality, trying, just like I said, to help people sort through the safety 2, safety differently, industry 4.0, safety 2.0, HOP, BBS. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of stuff out there, especially if you were just getting new to the profession. It'd be very difficult to get it all sorted. So Keith and I, and over 1,300 people so far, we're discussing sort of all what's new, what's good, and so on. On my screen, it is bottom right, is David Bianco, and many of you know David Bianco. He is the Global Safety, Health, Environment, and Quality Manager for EPIROC. And EPIROC, I think, is 6 continents. I don't think they're doing much mining in Antarctica right now. But maybe I'm wrong, David. Maybe you are everywhere in the world. But gentlemen, and last, sorry, guys, my co-moderator, Teg, I'm so sorry, Teg. Teg is Vice President Business Development with Safestart North America. But Teg also holds focus groups. I guess by now, over the last 12 to 14 months, there would likely have been over 50 major companies that have participated in these focus groups. Certainly not all 50 of them on the call at once. Can you imagine that? But so Teg's job is a bit like Keith's. Keith's going to sort of try to give us, not just his take on things, but also a bit of the UK European perspective. And Teg is also going to do the same thing. Obviously he's got his own opinions and perspectives, but he's also going to try, if he can, to sum up a bit of the collective thinking from these focus groups. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. We have had a lot of feedback, everybody, saying they want to hear more from the panelists. So we know you've all got tight schedules and stuff, but we've extended the show to 90 minutes, and it's available on recording too. So if you've got to jump off, whatever, you can always get the recording later. But like I said, we had so many people that said they wanted to hear more, especially the last one that we did on balancing just culture and accountability. How do you make it fair? I mean, we got into it, but everybody realized that we'd done more than scratch the surface, but we'd certainly hardly exhausted it or developed it as much and provided as much information and help as we could. Anyhow, guys, let me read the marketing description here so that we're all sort of on the same page in the audience. I can't imagine any of you would have memorized this. So just so we're all sort of starting, as I said, off the same page. Safety's come a long way, but have we really conquered rushing? Is safety really at odds with production? Or is that all in the past? I mean, certainly safety's come a long way in the last 50 years. However, it is still common to find people who think that safety costs time and money, but doesn't increase production or quality. Now, in some cases, depending on the example, it's true. I mean, putting a guard on a rotating sprocket doesn't make it go any faster. In other cases, it's not maybe the example, it's the paradigm or the perspective. Reducing hazards may not improve production or quality, at least not directly, but reducing human error will most likely improve production, improve morale, and decrease customer complaints and quality problems. High reliability organizations know this. They don't just focus on the hazards. We know nobody's ever trying to get hurt, but is anybody ever really trying to make any production mistakes, quality mistakes? or mistakes that would affect customer relations. And I know Teg's heard this example before, but I was at a company site where they'd shipped 3 truckloads, 150 skids of product to their best customer instead of their second best customer that ordered it. And when I was talking to the folks there, I said, did you do a root cause investigation? And they were kind of looking at me going, no, he doesn't usually make very many mistakes. And so, we just try to, be more careful in the future. And I was looking at him going, hopefully if you had to back the fork truck off the loading dock, you wouldn't be saying, try to be more careful in the future, right? Now, the subtext of this too is that this gentleman had not made very many shipping errors. But if you make a lot of mistakes, your rap sheet comes into play too. Like, in other words, how many mistakes has Freddie made at the shipping dock in the last year? And if Freddie's made too many mistakes, maybe we should get a new Freddie, right? But we don't, we tend to look at the system a lot more with safety, right? So, I'm not sure why this paradigm still exists, that safety costs money or that safety is somehow at odds with production. But this is what I want to sort of just get out, gentlemen, for the very first part here, is just how much of this problem do you think still exists, if you will? And we're going to try to quantify it a bit in terms of the supervisors and managers at your companies, David and Hector. So David, let me, if I can, start with you. Just a bit of the elevator speech on Epiroc, if you wouldn't mind, and then it just sort of your perspective on supervisors and managers at Epiroc. I mean, fairly advanced company, everybody, in terms of culture. I'll let David go on about that, if you will, because they're owned by Swedish company, so there's they are quite advanced for sure, right, David? But
yep. Yeah, I think thanks, Larry, for the invite, and hello to everybody. Yes, I'm the safety, health, environment check manager and quality. We call it at Epiroc. We used to be part of Atlas Copco, and they spun off the construction and mining into a new company called Epiroc. But as a product base, we've been in the market for in a company with 150 years with Atlas Copco, and Epiroc's been around 3 or so, almost 3 years. So we're focused on surface mining in my division, doing mining above ground. We have underground division as well, but ours is surface mining. And so the whole topic of safety, we you can be advanced in some ways, and you can be technologically advanced. We're very advanced in the product we make and its ability to move toward operatorless products in the field. We can literally operate a rig anywhere in the world without an operator in it these days. So there's a lot of technology that goes with that, but there's also a lot of safety related things in the field to make sure, if someone gets near it, they happen to not know that someone's not watching, it will stop. And there's a lot of new technologies in that. But we in the facilities produce the actual units, assemble them. And so you're back to raw manufacturing type capabilities. And so when it comes to safety, really, safety as being another thing to layer on top of what you already do is usually the problematic paradigm. It's really a matter of integrating. And so some of the technologies we're using on our factory floor now are visual management for putting the product together that include safety related considerations in them, including some of the human factors, like watch out for the line of fire, be careful, this is a heavy object, you could get fatigued. These are things that we're trying to integrate into the way we think and work, because it really can't be seen as something separate. And I think a lot of times, based on compliance rules, based on statistics, based on going to getting training and then walking away from it, it's seen as something apart from. And I think the issue here is to integrate it.
I want to get to the because that's exactly where we got to go, obviously.
Yeah.
But just for now, could you like, I don't think it would be realistic to say that 100% of your supervisors um, think that safety and production are all one smooth intertwined gear mesh versus
No.
somewhat at all. Like, so where would you say, just ballpark here, where would you say the percentages would be in terms of folks that still, are a bit on the, it's counterproductive versus it all goes together. You've got to see that it's part of the same gearworks.
Yeah, I'd say, we're probably over half of them, I think, really get the fact that it is now really integral to the process. But when you ask the question, my first response in my head was going to be, what time of the month do you want to ask that question? You, if you want to ask it on the 5th of the month or the 4th of the month, it's probably not as severe. So, that's one paradigm in a business, right? So that tends to be somewhat of the driver that is involved in that. And it's really not conscious, if you know what I mean. It's not like anybody's saying don't, work safely or don't whatever. But a lot of the things that we're willing to do or not do sometimes get compromised more as the pressures change for a variety of reasons.
Well, it's
So
amazing, Dave. In sales, for instance, whatever the last day is of a salesperson's quota for when they get their bonus, you get a lot of orders that day. So if you do it once a quarter, all people go, well, you know what? Maybe we should do this once a month. But obviously, if you got to once a day, it would be ludicrous. But so you've still got some that are over here, but majority over.
yeah.
Hector, what about um, give us, if you can, like I said, just a bit about HMEL. But again, you're running a big construction project. Obviously, there's a lot of time pressures and there's deadlines and penalties, and things can get pretty ugly once things get behind. So first of all, tell us a bit about HMEL, and then tell us a bit about how you think you're making out with this struggle or this balance.
Thank you, Larry, for the invitation and for all the panelists in this conversation. You know that HML embarked in this big project 3.5 years ago, and they're doing this investment in $3.5 billion in this mega petrochemical project. We are right now close to over 99% in the engineering completion, and the procurement is practically all done. We are also over 99%. So construction is where we are focused right now. We are over than 82% of the project, and we're going in roughly 2.5-3% progress per month. So if you make your math, you see that we're looking forward to be in the 95%. Any project, when you reach to the 95%, the last 5% is very tough to complete. And we have 25,000 people in the field right now. So we increase the manpower from the day that you came here, Larry, to today. We have practically 7,000, 8,000 people more. So we are right now in the really peak of the project. So that thinking about the question that you put forward for this discussion, Larry, I'm thinking that 75%, all depending of the level in the organization, 75% of the field supervisors still they're wrestling with the idea, with the conflict in between what is more important, production or safety, and how to blend both, how to work with both. Yeah.
But
and the reason,
75%, Hector, you would say,
yeah,
get it, or 75% you still don't get it? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear just for a second there. Which way is it? 75% are getting it?
75% they still wrestling. They're still thinking. So what I have to do, how I can get this done. So they still like if I do the permit to work with all the documentation, maybe it's going to be a lot of work. I'm not going to get this done today. So they have conflict with the process. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
So
About
it
75,
doesn't,
25, because I got to talk to the contractors and the people there that
yeah,
wanted, see, so it seemed to me like it was higher because I got to see all the people who were the 25, I got to see the 25%, right? That
yeah,
were all on
absolutely.
board. And they seemed to me to be really, like, even some of the contractors, the people from Lindy there, were very, like, for contractors, they looked like they were getting it, right? And I was really quite impressed. And Hector, with all this going on, I just want to again say thank you very much. It's like 11:30, almost midnight, everybody in India, and he's got tons of stuff going on. But Hector and I was thinking about last night, and I think I've actually known Hector now for just over 25 years. We first started working together in Latin America with Bredro Price. So thank you very much, Hector, for that. Now, Keith, representing all of the UK and Europe, I realize it's a bit, just your best guess there. But how much do you think there would be a struggle with this still in Europe? Like, that production at odds with safety, and is it is it worse in construction, Keith? I know you've got a lot more experience with construction, like hands-on there. So, if you
Absolutely.
can talk about industry in general, but also your specific, the
Well,
construction.
I want to bring this back to some of the things we've already said earlier. The really interesting thing is one thing you said there, Larry, is when you're talking to production people and they put a guard on a machine, it doesn't make the machine go any faster. But I'll tell you what, you take that guard off and someone gets caught in that machine, it will make it go a hell of a lot slower. And that's
Exactly.
the thing that production people don't really get. And what we've got to look at, and manufacturing, if you look at manufacturing, so I've worked in the aircraft industry in production, and I've worked in construction, and it's both about getting the job done and getting it done in time. And the problem you have is all of us in this room, and I'm gonna come see whose microphone's on. Hector. Well, I won't ask Hector because I know the answer might be yes, but I'm going to ask David. Or
Yep.
actually, let's go to David. Do you have
Yep.
elephants where you live?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. And do you know why? This is
They're
not
really large.
it's a trick question. It's because I came round to your house the other day and I painted anti-elephant paint all round your house.
That's what did it.
And sometimes when you're selling safety, that's what you're saying to people because they go, hold on, but I don't need you. I don't need a safety person because my production's good. It's doing. So in the same way, you're telling me there's no elephants around your house. I can tell you that's because I've come there as a safety professional and I've put my special safety elephant paint all round your house. And this is the trouble in production. And when you're looking at, see, Hector, you probably have got some elephants in places.
We are missing the
well,
influence tag. We are missing the British influence in safety.
And this is the thing we've got to pull together is, safety. There was a really good comment on the advert for Went Out From This from a guy called John Green. And John Green put on there, he said, one of the problems is we constantly treat safety as an effort, which is separate from the work, when in fact, it's an intrinsic part of what we do. You can't separate the two. And what we need to do is we need to get people to realize that safety is a quality item, and the quality item is protecting people. Safety is not this separate thing. It's just quality.
No question, and we're gonna go there. It's funny because I was Anthony Panapinto. A lot of you know Anthony from Procter and Gamble. He called me yesterday. He couldn't be on the show with us today, but he wanted definitely to talk about because he's doing a fair bit of work at P&G with the executives now on all of this, and it's going well. He said, but that the idea that the human component, just what your point, Keith, the human component it's got its limitations, just like other components do. And all of that has to be considered, if you will, in a total engineering perspective for the job, that it's never separable. But it's taken a while, and he's still not convinced that, everybody's, you can get a lot of people nodding their head, and that doesn't mean that you got right to their heart. Now,
Just to bring it back to your question, Larry.
but I do need the percentage. Like you've got to give us a ballpark percentage,
Yeah.
Keith, if you can, just to quantify it.
Absolutely. So bring it back to your question though. The challenge we don't have is with HSE professionals. The challenge you have is with the managers on the production line who think you are selling them anti-elephant paint.
Right.
And they're coming in. And this is where we need to change that. So your challenge really is you're probably looking, when you more get into the higher end of production, they've already got this. But when you're looking at low end of production versus safety, people, because they've not been on that journey, you're probably, I've found it's about 75% to 25%, 75 people, we still need to take on that journey.
So you're about the same where Hector is, about the 75,
Absolutely.
25. Would it get worse, or is that about where you'd say it would be in the construction industry, Keith? Because there's, construction's got its difficulties because of all the, the different layers of ownership and subcontractors, and, he works for me, but I've got to train him and all that stuff. Is it worse or better?
I think in construction it's got better, but that's only been very, very recently.
Okay.
And the worry we've got, and the worry I've got right now, that's going to hit us as a global body, is when we look at COVID is producing this economic downturn. And if you go back 20 years in construction, people didn't speak up. They didn't raise that hazard. They didn't raise that accident because they were afraid they could lose their job. And their job is the important thing to them. They don't come to work to get paid. They come to work so you don't stop paying them. So therefore, if we've got this challenge at the moment with COVID, where people are out of work and there is a resource flood, people are less likely to raise hazards, tell us what's going wrong right now in this kind of, as we come back out this economic downturn, because they're worried they're going to lose their job. So we will see it get worse.
25 is 10 years.
We're going to see it get worse.
Okay, all right, Tag. Now, your job single-handedly, I can imagine trying to sum up North American perspective, because it's all, I know from industry to industry it varies considerably. I'd like to think the people in oil and gas and nuclear power get it, but I've been on site with a lot of places that are very, very negatively managed still. So that's scary, because like every negative blame culture just makes me worry what has been driven underground that you don't know, right? Because you don't know until boom, and then we go, well, I guess they weren't as good as they said. And what best you can, Ted, quantified for us.
Yeah. I think it's, for a start, I think it's quite funny how you've got Keith representing UK and Europe, and you've got another Brit representing North America. So I mean, just for the record, I think that's quite funny. But I think some of the points being raised, they're excellent already, and there's a lot of nuanced stuff here, right? So in preparation for this meeting today, I did a bunch of stuff. So I looked back at all over the last 6 months, the conversations that we've been having in the round tables and the focus groups, for sure. But I also looked at individual meeting notes that I'd had with individual corporates, and the vast majority of them are Fortune 500, Fortune 500-esque kind of companies, big organizations, right? And Keith said something really, really interesting a minute ago, right, where he said, the problem doesn't really sit with the HSE professionals so much, right? Because if you talk to those individuals, and again, I did 70% of those individuals understand that problem in that alignment on the way down the chain, right? They'll openly share it and they'll openly talk about it, right? They'll talk about, integration of systems. They'll talk about quality and safety, the lack of connection that is made on the front line between those items. They'll talk about the employee engagement and the importance of that. They'll talk about stock work authority, which is what Keith was just mentioning now. And it might work fine in theory, but how often does the trigger get pulled in practice? And I know when we used to do meetings in boardrooms, how many times I've asked senior executives, they're all talking about how well their stock work authority works. But then you ask the question, well, when's the last time it happens? And they go, oh, it happens all the time. And then you go, no, really, when was the last time it happened? And then they kind of look at each other and they go, well, I think we had a case in 1979, right? So you get these.
That's funny because it's the same perspective about people getting written up and fired and disciplined at places too. Oh, it happens all the time. And you go, well, anybody you've ever worked with been written up? No. Anybody you know been fired? Well, no, but it happens all the time. Well, who does it happen to all the time? Yeah.
Exactly. So we have these organizational myths, right? Essentially, that's what we've got. So there's this realization. I'd said it 70% was the estimate I made for the HSE,
Okay.
right? 20% of them, though, frankly, don't see it as a problem, right? So I don't quite agree with what Keith said. 20% of it don't see it as a problem, even though they've just been talking to me for an hour and I understand exactly why it is a problem within their organization. So they have a blind spot in that location, in that kind of place. And then organizations that don't really have it a problem, if I was pulling a finger in the air, I'd say it's probably about 10% of them, where they've got that situation where, safety is genuinely a value or close to a value, and they've kind of built it up into that cultural kind of system that they've got, so that then you don't get those questions about stock work authority. You don't get those questions about how it impacts on safety. The organization understands it, so that when people come in to work for the organization, they learn it from the people around them, because they say, oh, actually, that's the way that we do things around here. Culturally, that's the way that we do it. So it must be important. And that's the point where kind of culture becomes your friend, right?
Okay, interesting. So about 70%. See, now the other reason, of course, we want Ted to be a co-moderator here is because I'm not really a moderator on this subject. I do not have a neutral perspective on this at all. I have, this is the subject that I'm kind of on a personal basis. I'll just tell you everybody how this happened. Is I am doing a session on Safestart performance, which is simply about taking the critical error reduction techniques and helping everybody in the organization see how you can use them beyond safety and apply it to quality, production efficiency, customer relations, whether they're inside or outside customers. And obviously, if you're moving or things are moving around you, then safety is always, line of fire and balance, traction, grip are always in play. And we're talking about rushing and, production. And I said, okay, well, we know that there's, that either you're causing yourself to rush, somebody else is, or the equipment or the environment is, the three sources of unexpected. So how often does the equipment or the equipment breaking down, like your car breaking down, or the environment outside of your control, how often does that cause you to rush? How often do other people cause you to rush? And how often do you cause yourself to rush? Like, you forgot something and you had to go back and get it. And now, you got to rush because you don't have enough time, or you didn't plan something correctly. And everybody pretty much said 95% of the time you rush, it wasn't because of the equipment or the environment, and it wasn't because of the other guy. So that left us with either you made a mistake or poor planning. And then I kind of looked at everybody because I just thought about myself. David knows this gentleman, Paul Crow. And I said, but have any of you ever planned to rush? Like, did any of you ever do like what Paul Crow and I did in Bogota, Colombia one morning and say, let's just stay here at the hotel and have an extra cup of cappuccino because the airport won't be busy? And it was the busiest day in the history of that airport. And instead of me being able to run up and plead with everybody to cut in line, they were patrolling the line with dogs and men with machine guns. So I didn't think I'd try it that day. But nobody plans to rush because it's unpleasant. And so then we got to then 90% of the time that we rush personally, it's because we're trying to make up for a performance error. Like you got halfway to the airport and you realize you forgot your passport. Now you're going to be rushing and you're not going to have a choice, right? So the whole paradigm for me was that you're blaming rushing on evil production managers that care more about money than safety. And yet when you really distill it all down, just think about it. You go out to the car, you forget your phone, we just watch how fast you run back into the house to get it, even if you're not in a rush, because you don't like wasting time making mistakes. So, to get to the real bottom of something like a project that's a big project, and you go, well, what's the chances that you're running something like Hector and like the cement truck is never going to arrive late, or that somebody isn't going to make a mistake ordering it on time? So, how much of rushing is actually just caused by making up for performance errors? And then again, if you tackled the error, you're not going to just deal with the production inefficiency, you're also going to likely improve the quality and the safety. So, my take on this is that the perspective or the paradigm for a lot of these supervisors and managers is the problem. It isn't necessarily a moral or an ethical issue. We got good supervisors and bad supervisors. Yes, I've met some pushy supervisors, and I'm sure you all have too. But most of them are pretty good guys. And when you go looking for the evil middle managers, most of those guys are just running around scrambling, trying to get everything done because there isn't enough of them anymore. And the senior guys are actually some of the nicest people and smartest people you'll ever meet. And they don't want anybody hurting their property. They don't want anybody hurting their watch. And so, I kept looking for where are all these evil people, and I could never find them. So, David, why don't you sort of tell us how, like it's been a long time. I know you haven't been there the whole 150 years, but what did you do that kind of started the movement and got everybody to, I don't want to say see the light because that sounds a little metaphysical. I didn't mean to give it like that, but I mean it, because it's not about that, in my opinion, although obviously that is a part of it, but I think it's much more about that you just got to see that the gears are all related. You can't one of them out. But anyhow, tell me how it went with you guys.
So there's two aspects to this, because I've been thinking about my percentage versus what I've heard from the others, so I'm reflecting a bit. So we used to be owned by a large US company. I'm not going to mention who they are. And I think long before the saying was ever said, get her done, it was probably created there with them. And so we went from a very poor example of what should be the priorities and what have you. And then when Atlas bought us, they started to really steer us in the right direction and towards really living out what we say, because we say safety first is a slogan. It's really a slogan, and we're moving now to say safety always, partly because of SafeStart, because really your safe behavior needs to be there all the time. But when you talked about performance,
but safety always, I think, it's just so safety first is just begets argument with anybody. Like, okay, and we're closed down, so how much safety do we have to worry about? I mean, where safety always is like inarguable, like so.
Right.
So,
well, yeah, first means I can reprioritize it, right?
Yeah.
It got to first, now I can go to second, right? The old billboard hit parade, So the issue here to me that really strikes me is where the shift started to occur is performance and perception. Because when you talk about rushing, for example, and people's perception about being rushed, a lot of times they put that on themselves. But
right.
I listened to an executive leader talk about the business, and all of a sudden I started to pick up a theme, and I heard the word faster, quicker, more agile, need to get this done, need to, you know, and this theme starts. So I'm trying, so like 18 times, that was the real focus. So I asked people who listened to it, what did you get out of what you heard? And to a man and woman, they said, we're not going fast enough. So that perception lays a groundwork, right? So people don't fail to plan, they plan to fail. You know, the other way around, sorry. You know, they don't plan to do that, but what they end up doing is they end up in the back of their mind, they've got this stirring in the back of their mind that that's the priority. Now, no one ever says not to do it safely, but the issue is this: we had to get people convinced that that is not in fact the priority. It is an outcome when things are done well, when things are done right. It is an outcome. It isn't something you do to make something happen. It is an outcome that you look back and say, wow, we were more efficient at that. And wow, we, you know, if you purely push it, then you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do the things that, you know, we know people do, shortcuts. Everybody knows the word short. Nobody thinks about the word cut, right? So that's what happens. So really flipping some perceptions has been part of why I think we're gaining on that.
Okay, all right. Any, like, for the folks listening, David, anything that they could readily grab on, like, you know, the, like, tangible?
Talk to your people, understand where they're at, understand their perspective. Everybody comes from perspective. And that is the big, to me, people do things for a reason, and people don't do things for a reason. And what the heck is the reason? Now, you could sit there and make up your own guess, but it's going to be just that. And so really dialoguing with people and having, you know, that sensitivity to say, yeah, I heard a 20-minute speech, but all I really heard was this. You know, that was the theme. So what is the theme? You know, so understanding them and understanding what they go through. They feel pressured for a reason. What is the reason? Let's get to the root cause of that. Behavior has a reasoning for why it happens. And talking to your people is really critical, and that is not done enough. We talked about it on the COVID tapes, and we said that it's the same darn thing, because there's only one thing we all have in common, and that's our humanity.
Well, I know, but I think you brought up a really interesting point, though, too, and that is that, you know, when you get right down to it, the connection has to be at the individual level. Like, for instance, okay, you're out at a construction site, and you ask the guy to go get whatever it is, the plans and your tablet off the front seat of your pickup truck. And the guy comes out and gets it to you, and you're like, oh man, you forgot the charger. He's like, oh, sorry. And so he runs back, like, it's a little error. It's not, you know what I mean? But now he's running back to the truck, and he trips over a hose or a board or something and falls down. And it's just that little bit of rushing, like when you get a bit behind. Now, when you talk about the shortcut thing, this is, and Hector mentioned this already too, and that is like, now you've made a couple of little mistakes as the supervisor. Your job's a little bit behind because of the mistakes that you and the crew made, because you had to redo this, didn't measure it properly, whatever it was, but it's your fault and you know it. Now that extra 5-10 minutes to redo the risk assessment because you had to move the crane, now that seems like 5 or 10 minutes that we don't have. That's where I think it gets to be really difficult, is when it's my mistake that caused the delay, but we can make up the time by either rushing or by cutting a corner. And I think that's, the part that we overlook a lot. You know, we're all willing to blame the guy at the procurement office for poor planning, but it's hardly like that's the only place in the organization it's going to occur, right? We all mess up here and there, little things every day. So Hector,
Supply
what?
chain of error.
Well, yeah. So Hector, over to you. Now I know your internet may have cut in and out a bit, and you didn't get to hear everything that David said, but basically he was saying that it took a while to sort of get the people to see that it wasn't separate, that it was all part of it. So maybe if you could just talk a bit about the permanent workforce there, because obviously, you've been able to get a little more traction with your permanent workforce, Hector. And then what, if anything, could you share with the people watching that you think sort of helped a bit with the contractors?
Well, I think that it's a big difference in the culture approach in between the workers that we have for construction and our permanent employees. If you go to our permanent employees in HML, the level of culture and the level of incorporation of safety in their normal way to work is more aligned. So they're more in the process, in the planning process, they are incorporating safety from the beginning. So, and I
Right.
can tell you that maybe the ratio there is higher. So you have more people engaged working in safety and actually looking for the safety department more for support, for advice, for clarifications for the procedures. They know the procedures, they know where the procedures are, they know how to apply the procedures. Sometimes, you have some gray areas, sometimes you have very high risk activities. They're looking for some support, for some kind of help to understand those areas where the procedures sometimes the implementation can be quite tricky. But the real issue is the contractor supervisors in the field. Because we're talking, if you have 25,000 workers, you're talking that you have maybe 3,000 supervisors in the field. 3,000 supervisors that they are not the same guys that you have 3-4 months ago. So they are rotating because they are moving forward with the different disciplines as long as you are progressing in the project. So you are practically every 2 months, you're working with new people. So teaching them how to go through the process is a big deal. So the only way that we are doing that is we have a super big safety organization in the field just to provide them with a second pair of eyes that are behind them, just to making sure they're following the processes that they have to follow in the field before they go into work. And of course, it's a big challenge.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they know safety is very important. The problem is they don't know how to incorporate it because they're always behind. And what you're saying about rushing is absolutely fantastic. So what happened is that most of the time they're rushing because the planning process in that level, in the supervision level in the field, is practically very, very small. So they don't have a lot of control to do the planning, thinking, oh, this is the activity I'm gonna do tomorrow, or this is the activity I'm gonna do during the week. Practically the planning is in highest level. But in the floor level, for the supervisor and the workers you have in front, practically taking in the week the first 2 days to figure it out what they're going to do during the week. Yeah. And
Yeah,
in that moment,
I
those
didn't.
are actually the defenseless moment that they have.
Yeah, Hector. I mean, I didn't. When I think back to when let's face it, everybody, this is more than a few months ago when I worked construction. Okay, but back in high school, or college. But I'm not trying to insinuate that we made performance errors daily that wasted hours. What I'm saying is that a week did not go by, though, without at least one performance error somewhere, somehow, of at least a couple of hours. And normally, the way our supervisor made that time up was he basically cracked the whip. And, we ran, we were laying asphalt. Like, it wasn't really, we're traffic all around. It's not a good place to be rushing, for sure. But that's how he did it. And that's how, I don't think that was atypical back then, right? But that's a long time ago in Bethlehem. The glaciers were receding. So, things have improved since then. Um, what about Europe, and what have you seen Keith, in terms of, people seeing that it's integrated, not a push-pull? What have you seen work well?
Well, again, I want to come back to some of the points that have been raised here. Absolutely, because one of the things in good production, in a good project program, so both in manufacturing and in construction, you shouldn't be rushing if you've planned the job properly. And this is the challenge that we really get. And I want to really move that around to what you were talking about there, Larry. Now, in construction, and definitely a challenge you get in the UK with the fact that investment cycles in the UK, and you have to deliver big infrastructure projects to a delivery date. So if you're delivering an infrastructure project and the client says, we've got our project plan, we're deciding to launch this new cable TV channel on this date, so therefore you have to have laid all the CCTV cable, you've got to connect it up all the customers, you've had to do all this. And what I find sometimes happens in construction, not so much in manufacturing, because they're a bit more organized. They've had Kaizen, they've had 5S, they've had Six Sigma for years. But in construction, you do get that the front end, the procurement process to appoint the contractor, the choosing the contractor, the setting up the contract, and all of that starts to drift. So the people that aren't even involved in the actual on the ground construction squeeze the construction time on site, yet the client goes, but I still want my building to open on this date. I still want this to happen. So that's where you get, now you can manage that. You can throw more resources at it. You can say to the client, we're going to have to put an extra 10 people on because you want this done in this time rather than that time. But we do need to educate the client and the people, shall we say, if you imagine there's this double reflective mirror running through the middle of any project.
But Keith, it's a really important point. I don't mean to interrupt you, but just so Ted can make a note of this and he doesn't forget.
He keeps laughing at me. That what worries me the most.
But the part about the client, I think, is really key, everybody. That's just my personal point of view. And that is that in order for this to work, you have to explain the reality of humanity to the client, not that they're unaware, but that how it would manifest itself into a potential disaster on this site, which none of us want to have happen. You don't want the publicity, opening up your new shopping mall or whatever it is on the heels of a tragedy. We don't want the tragedy. So if something happens, an unforeseen delay, either due to our fault, negligence, or circumstances, force majeure, never mind, we have to have an understanding that we mitigate the risk. We don't just increase the risk. And that without like, Hector, you got to admit, this is where I think the oil companies in the world do step up as the host and as the client. They start dictating this to the contractors instead of it being the other way around, where the last people that get convinced of this are the people with the money that are paying for it. And obviously that's going to set up all kinds of counterproductive sort of motivators, right? I got to come back to this. You got 27, I'm picturing now all of those, like just those supervisors being able to get their crews together, like the people, the labor and everything like that. And then to have to expand that to 27,000. Are you pulling from all over the country now to get those people, or can you get it still from mostly your quadrant in northern India? Because you'd have to so many languages. Like I'm thinking from languages now that must be just crazy there.
Well, they're coming from all the different parts of India. Most of them they are from UP, that is practically the center of the country. And let me tell you something. So yes, it's like today we have it's a National Safety Day in India. So we have a celebration, and most of the speeches that they were giving, they were actually doing one of the play roles they were doing was in actually 5 different languages.
Wow. Well, there you go.
It's overwhelming. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Keith,
It's
you were going to
overwhelming.
say?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to that double reflective mirror in the middle. And there's two things that does. One, you've got the client that doesn't really quite understand how his building gets built or how his project's delivered. A bit like if you have a bathroom installed in your house, do you really know how a plumber works? If you have a kitchen fit and extension, and that double reflective mirror might be bad in a domestic setting, but you imagine in a major project, that's there. So you've got that disconnect. Even worse, and we talked about this with safety programs, is if you've got these people in the top go, great, we've got an idea for a safety program, and they decide to cascade that down. The guy at the front line is looking, going, but I've worked for 20 years. I've done this safely. I've done this well. I deliver on time. I'm really good. And all of a sudden, you've just thrown this extra challenge to me of extra reporting you want and that. We don't break through that glass barrier to actually say to the guys on the ground, what do you need? And that's kind of, I think, especially in production, especially in construction, we sometimes do get some clever people at the top that introduce a new project or a new system, or they have this idea that this will work well, but they don't. It gets pushed on managers, and managers just go, look, we've been told we're doing this. As you say, the whip still gets cracked. You know, look, we've been told we've now got to report this figure. So can you go and count the number of screws or leaves on site? And we do need to definitely break through that mirror and have those conversations.
Well, and it's Keith. We've got to be careful here that the perspective is more subtle than perhaps I'm portraying it to be. So, if I could give you maybe a more realistic example, just a little while ago, dealing with a big consortium in India, and they were asking about rate your state, and the idea of the supervisors just going out and engaging people and saying on a scale of 1 to 10, how much rushing, frustration, fatigue, complacency are you dealing with today? You know, how are you doing, and what kind of errors could those cause in the future? And although the safety and health people and the operations people listening to this were very intrigued with the methodology, because they could see that you didn't need good communication skills. You only needed ordinary, normal communication. Everybody knows the 1 to 10 rating system. That's what they use at the hospital to rate your pain. I mean, it's not like, it's not like anybody needs it broken down for them. Anybody can do it. It's easy. But their first question was, how many sort of fix up items and repair things typically get generated by this process? And they're worried about the time and the money. And I was trying to explain to them that, yes, that typically happens when you initiate a behavior-based safety process, is that when people will start telling you about the unsafe conditions and the things that should be improved, and you end up with a fairly big list of things at the beginning when you implement a behavioral safety process. So it's a legitimate question, but in a way you're kind of going, well, look, guys, the reality is the faster you get all this stuff fixed, the better anyhow. So it needs to be fixed if it's a problem. So, you're saying I don't want to do it if it's going to cost me a lot of time and money. And I'm saying that's not really the right perspective to be looking at this from. If those things are a problem, you should be trying to get them dealt with as fast as possible, because that's the quickest, cheapest, fastest way to do it, right?
Absolutely, you've got to, you've got to rip that plaster off at speed sometimes.
Yeah.
But it is a case of, if someone can't.
That's a Band-Aid, everybody in North America, by the way.
Absolutely, rip that Band-Aid off. Sorry, but it is one of those things that if the guy on the front line can't see that he's got a problem to start with, that's where the education comes to. And I know I held this up the other day. and it is something I want to talk about in terms of when we're trying to break through that mirror. It is a case of we need to concentrate on that.
For those of you who weren't with us on the show with Keith and I, one of the points he brought up was that quite often, especially with behavioral safety, we'll go and be very happy when we start getting the percent safe of 4 or 5 behaviors up 20, 30%. And then we can kind of show people that the injury rate went down 20 or 30%, instead of actually just nailing one of those critical behaviors to 100% and being able to celebrate that we actually, kind of eradicated this problem. And now everybody here wears a hard hat. It's the culture, and you'd kind of feel lonely if you weren't wearing one, and to really nail that one thing down instead of just try to make the tide go up. And that was it's a really valuable point. Anyhow, Keith, I gotta move to Tag and get Tag to some up North America for us here in terms of what well, first of all, about when did everything start moving in the right direction, Tag, and where do you think it is now, and what stuff have you heard worked the best?
They're 3 pretty big questions. I think I think there's a growing understanding, and I think it's fair to say it's particularly taken off in, say, the last 5 or 6 years, where there's a growing understanding that we need to address this alignment piece, and it's not as simple as we thought it was. So we've got alignment of. I want to look back again to things that a lot of people have said, actually. So I want to. You said something a few minutes ago, Larry, that senior leaders, middle managers, supervisors, they're all good people, right? And certainly from my experience talking to CEOs and these kind of individuals, they don't want to get anybody hurt. But the system sometimes works against them. You've been talking a lot about construction and project plans. A number of times I've sat in boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies, and they've shown me their construction plan, and they've got less than 1% worth of error in terms of billion dollar projects. And I've sat there and I'm going, well, how the hell is that going to work? Right? And the construction guys in the room, they kind of go, yeah, they just don't want to say it to their leadership. Now, the interesting thing is, once the leadership understand it, then there's shift, right? But to go back to something that Keith said, there's got to be that willingness to talk truth.
If you put in a cushion in your bid, and the other guys don't put a cushion in their bid, and you justify the price variation other than our guys tend to screw up a lot when they're tired, you're never going to get any work, right? So this becomes like a real game too, in terms of, like worker, like extra work, like thing. Oh gosh, like a lot of my friends are in construction. So they all have lawyers on staff because of all of this stuff, right? It's just a nightmare. Yeah.
So let me take that in, because what you're now talking about is something else that we've been sort of not dancing directly with, dancing around, which is contractor management, appointment of contractors. That's a system issue, right? Yeah. So that, and the number of times I've seen contractors be appointed because they're a little bit cheaper, but then when you look at, did we really look at their safety record? It was a lower down consideration. That's a system issue.
Oil companies do usually, but as you start moving down the hierarchy, if you will, to get into, I would suggest that at some places, the guy that, the reason we got this contractor is they were the only ones that answered the phone that morning so they could come in, like, you know what I mean? Like, we got to be, I know exactly what you mean. Right? They need the plumbing fixed. The first guy that answers the phone is likely coming in, and they're not likely going to be scrutinizing the minutes of their safety meetings to see if it's just a gripe session or whether they've got a safety culture. But I mean, they've been doing that at oil companies for over 20 years.
Yeah, it's true. But the point is that organizations learn, right? They learn that actually, is this really important for this particular organization? And it's true, other organizations, they know that it's really important, right? So they position themselves, they learn from it. And then you come down the chain, right? So then you get this thing where the message coming from the senior leadership from a safety perspective, it's clear in their mind, but somewhere along the chain, it gets twisted or it gets misconstrued, maybe because of these other systems that we get in. So that the emphasis that the senior leadership would like is not what's heard on the front line. Okay, so what skills do we need to give people? We need to make sure that the people on the front line can understand it. So there's the alignment piece, that's a systems piece, right? They have the skills to talk about it, they understand how it fits in, and there's that system within the organization that allows that communication to go up as well as down. And if you think of supervisors as being so critical to our organizations and how they function nowadays, if we give those people those skills, the right skills they need in terms of recognizing hazards, the way to talk about it, the way to motivate people on the front line, they can talk about things with passion, they can explain things to their leaders, why things are difficult and what's going wrong, so that they can make the decisions to change it, then actually you have a good functioning organization.
When they can do all that, Tag, then we'll poach them from the front line and we'll promote them and we'll put another rookie in place who has to go through the whole learning curve all over again. And that's as best you get at the permanent workforce. I mean, you know, back over to Hector and the 27,000 fly-by nights that are running through. Like I said, you know, like I got pictures of 5, 6 people on motorcycles with no helmets. So like the cultural change from driving around Batindra to coming into their site is pretty night and day too, right? You know, in other words, you've got a fairly low level of or high risk tolerance with people coming in to begin with that you've got to try to explain this is not a positive thing here, like, because they think I'm willing to risk myself for you and for production, and you've got to say that's not valued here actually, which is counterproductive to their whole culture in a way, you know, like that I'm willing to do this is, you know, very pervasive in the area. So David, let me just see if I could be Nail, I don't want to try to put you on the spot, but if you were going to say what was the one best thing that you think you did, and if you could give the folks listening kind of one, you know, your best tip or best recommendation for helping the supervisors and the managers to not see conflict.
I think and this goes to someone wrote a question here, and I want to address it through this, talking about really integrating safety into the way we work, because really it's a process. And you talked about things that create rushing. So in our line of business, there are any number of times where we don't have the part we need when we need it. And so that creates a lull potentially, or a gap in time, but we certainly know we're going to get the part. We certainly know we're going to have to install the part, and the odds are we're going to probably have to do it at a time which is out of sequence with what we normally do, which means there may be something in the way that normally isn't in the way. It's going to be not the normal process. So taking that opportunity and deciding how we're going to do it when the time comes, when the part comes in, as opposed to just my guys are professionals, they know what they're doing, they'll get it in there. So taking the advantage of thinking through what it is you have to do with safe considerations in your processes in advance of those when that opportunity presents itself, instead of just be crying the fact you don't have the part. You've got to be able to calibrate your process, calibrate your thinking, calibrate your approach, because it may take longer to do it.
Are you saying that you should have thought about how you were going to distribute the vaccine before it actually arrived?
Maybe.
Like,
yeah.
You know, like you could have said, you know what, it's going to probably happen sometime in the next 3 to 12 months. When it does, perhaps we should figure out how we're going to get it to all the people instead of waiting until it arrives on our shore and then getting it done. Anyhow, I'm just whinging a bit, but we didn't knock this one out of the park in Canada, Hector. I mean, we're, I think, far, far down the list in terms of percentage of population vaccinated. But it's exactly what David's saying. You're going to have delays. You're going to have issues in advance. What can you do to compensate for it all? But like if having a plan versus our plan is we will scramble and run like chickens with our heads cut off, right? Which is the reality, David, in most places, right? That's what you will do, And when the cement truck finally gets there, everybody's going to run and we're going to try to minimize the overtime, right? And then one other thing happens and you can start to see people getting their judgments and things can really start to get now unraveled, right? And I talked to many construction superintendents about things like, like why didn't you shore the trench? And things like when about, and that's so a lot of it has to do with delays that were their own fault they were trying to make up for, like I said, but we all do that, right? But if you know that, hey, you've got a couple of get out of jail cards free with the owner or the client, like you were saying, Keith, right? If you could get that understanding, like, hey, look, I understand 10 get out of jail cards free means you want another contractor. I got it. But I'm not going to pretend that our guys are perfect. So, maybe instead of just bidding an extra 20%, I put something in there about, if due to unforeseen circumstances, it's understood that we won't increase the risk from a safety perspective, like getting something.
I think the maturity is that we need to get, and let's not call them clients. Let's just call them the funds, the resource, the money, because they're not always directly a client. They can be at any level of a business. They can be the construction manager, the MD of the construction company. They can be in the client. But what we need to do, as you say there, Larry, we definitely need that maturity that unfortunately people at the front end of construction are usually in an office. They're not out on the site and they don't have that experience. And when they make a mistake, they've still got another 3 years of construction delivery. And so they might have to send out a tender a day late, things like that. But when you're getting down to the delivery date and the cement truck turns up late, now it's not just the cement truck turning up late. You might find if that one truck is late, the rest of your pour from the 3 days before, because it's all got to cure at the same time, suddenly you've got to rip the whole stuff out. So it's not just one truck. It could be the 10 previous trucks have then become useless. But as a client, and I've found this working both client, contractor, consultant, people in the procurement side, they don't quite get that nuance of construction. And that's kind of where we need to help, is we need to help them understand that you make mistakes. And you know what? In construction, in production, we make mistakes as well. And we need to have these mature conversations about them.
Yeah, instead of pretending or covering it up or whatever.
Yeah.
Hector, if I could, sorry, David, I don't know if you got a chance for the second part. Like the first one was, plan for mistakes, plan for delays, and make sure people know what to do when there is one, so that the plan A is not run around like a chicken with your head cut off to fix it, right? Was anything else though that you'd recommend to the folks going forward? And then I'm going to go to Hector, and then we're going to take questions and wrap up. So,
Sure. The other biggest thing beyond deviations is, again, I can't overemphasize the fact that somebody made a comment in the questions about safety people understanding production. In other words, collaborating more, because we've got to respect and understand the pressures that are on them and help them think about how to overcome those in a safe way. And I think that's a fair comment and a fair thing that I think as the collaboration there gets stronger, I think we end up with a better end result for the workers and for the company. So really that collaboration and understanding, because it's always, we can be a little bit judicial in safety, with expectations. And really we need to work prudently together. And I think that's really, get on the floor, talk to the people, know where their perspective is, as I said earlier, but also understand the pressures those supervisors are under and where that's coming from and how you can help them maybe work safer. Because really, that's really what they want to do. But absent that, they're going to react and respond, and sometimes in a way that we don't like, of course.
Well, and I also think your point there, David, about the, when you get to a point where you're getting a bit of a block, and there's a tendency sometimes for safety folks to then fall back on the law and say, well, it's the law and you have to. And they had an opportunity for that engagement, but instead of being a little more patient and making a bit more effort, they kind of defaulted to, I got the law behind me, but you kind of lost your opportunity now, right? So, Hector, what about you? If I could just, what do you think worked the best for you with your own permanent staff and with the contractors in terms of, reducing the conflict or improving the integration and balance? And then if you had anything you could recommend to safety professionals going forward that you think might help them with this struggle?
Well, you know that we have been working developing the medium leadership in the organization. So all the leaders from the contractors, from RCMs, from resident construction managers, superintendent by areas, and supervisors, and the implementation of a performance monitoring process that we call the loss prevention indicator, and that is actually just a monitoring for the golden rules that we have implemented, the lifesaver rules that we have implemented in the field. So, and what we do is that every week we do this monitoring, and we share the data in the different groups, area by area, contractor by contractor. And take a look what happened, that the contractors that are doing have been improving their performance, as Tech was saying, are the contractors that have very clear systems in place, are the contractors that they know they have a methodology to do their job, they have a planning, and they have a process in place. Those contractors have the best safety performance, and also those contractors are the ones that are creating for the company profit in this project. So most of these contractors, they are productive and they're happy with the project, and they know they're accomplishing their targets. So the contractors that have a poor performance, of course, are the ones that are struggle with financial issues. They have planning issues, and you can see they really struggle. They never move forward from the LPI score. No more than 85% is the maximum they can get in the best of their weeks. They're still having issues with working at high, like they start to work yesterday. They have been here working for 3 years. But let me tell you, what happened is that when you have these international players and you blend them to work with the local contractors, and they see the international players like Technimol, L&T from India, that is a great company, the guys from Linde, for example.
Right, yeah.
So of course you start to see the very nice phenomenon. Like, for example, we have a local company that their name is Oil, and they have been improving their safety performance fantastic. And the point is that because they working close to Technimol, is from Italy, they're working together, and they have been learning, and they feel the competition, they feel the pressure, and right now they're putting themselves in the same level of performance that Technimol, and you start to see that they start to pick up their ranking in safety, their better position, and actually they're having right now one of the best records that we have, and also they're very happy because they start to see some money. So it's a difference. Absolutely, it is a difference. But when you do a mega project, as you were saying, Larry, is very true, that when you are in a country like India, so you have to, you can bring some international players, but you have to give job to the local companies. You have to develop the local contractors. You have to give them opportunities. You have to develop them. That's number one. So you have to play with them. And number two is that that you have to use whatever you have here. So sometimes that you have a lot of resources that maybe of technology that you maybe will be using in other part of the world, that that is here. So you have to work with what you find here and the way these people work with the resources they have. So this is one of the limitations and also one of the challenges that we have. So
Well,
in general,
same thing
let me tell you,
in America too, though, right, Hector? I mean, you've got you've got the good things and the bad things with the cultures, right? There's,
yep, absolutely.
I mean, in both Latin America and India, there's no, sense of entitlement to safety. I get hurt, I'll sue you. There's none of that.
Nope.
But on the other hand, people are willing to take risks that, like I wouldn't, I wouldn't be willing to ride a motorcycle without a helmet, right? So, it's just, there's,
Absolutely.
and, you see, like you were saying, that's pretty high up there to be working without a fall arrest harness. I wouldn't do it no matter how much you paid me, but I'm kind of afraid of heights. So, but you'd see a lot of risk tolerance for sure. Tag,
Yeah, but Larry, but let me tell you. So coming from when I came here, the total incident rate was 1.83. Now we're closing with 0.74. So, and it's just in 2 years.
excellent, Hector. Well done.
I think it's an amazing accomplishment for considering all the limitations and also the big number of workers that we have and the high turnaround that we have.
I was only there for a couple of days, Tag. It's pretty impressive, don't you think? Just kidding, Hector. Just kidding. I got to talk to a few people though. They had great management. The management group that I got to present to there was, I was pretty impressed with those guys, and I was pretty impressed with the contractors too. Tag, can you? I don't know if you can sum up in 5 minutes what everybody sort of said here. Best things, best practices. I've made a few notes. I wouldn't want to take maybe you could take a shot at it. And in the meantime, I'll see if there's any pressing questions, if I can get them off the chat box from Mike, and then we'll wrap up, everybody. So,
well,
go ahead,
yeah, I'll give it a go. As usual, I've got like pages of notes, half of them written in red and half of them written in black and stuff. I want to, but there's been lots of very, very strong points made today. So I want to start actually with. I want to start with a point I think everyone's made, which is this importance of like this integration kind of piece, and really how safety is perceived within the organization, and the fact that it's perceived to collaborate with operations and at a senior level too. I'll make a brief comment on that. There was years and years ago, I was asked to do a conference speech on the safety professional of the future. Actually, so probably about 10 years ago, I was asked to do this. And so what I did as part of my preparations, I phoned around a bunch of GMs and CEOs and senior leaders, and I said, tell me about the safety execs you liked working with and ones you didn't. And they were friends of mine, so they could be quite honest. And the interesting thing, I want to loop back to something exactly what David said now, right? The good ones were the ones who could explain to the senior leaders why things were a problem. So, but they could come up with solutions and alternative sort of suggestions, as opposed to just as you were saying, Larry, coming down well these are the rules and this is what we need to do. They were advisors effectively to the senior leadership, right? And that plays into the points that we've been talking about in terms of planning and construction, all those sort of things. If we get
I also thought the idea that the safety people need to know more about the production. I don't know if you said this, Keith or Hector, that
absolutely.
or David. Sorry, David. That like a little more walk a mile in the other guy's shoes, as opposed to keeping asking them to walk the 2 miles in your shoes. Maybe I'm
exactly
being right, but
that's part of being an advisor, isn't it? You understand the other person's problem, you understand their point of view, so that the suggestions you come in, they recognize it, they understand it effectively in their language or their worldview, and then you can work together to create the solution. I'm not sure. I think it might have been David who said it. This thing is easy to understand in theory, but actually in practice, and I think you said it at the beginning, Larry, right? It's pretty subtle. actually, right? And we have to understand those levels of the subtlety and how that kind of comes together. I think that's very, very important. We've had a lot of conversation about contractors. Hector and Keith have talked about that at length. And I think I thought, well, the reason I laughed earlier on, Keith, was when you said mirror, right? And I thought you were going to say something, which is what I say quite a lot. Quite often, what organizations don't understand is that contractors are effectively a mirror of what those organizations value, right? And you know, but when organizations realize that, and to build on something that Hector was saying, we support our contractors, we work with them to solve problems. You know, we show that safety is a value, and they understand why it's important for quality, they understand why it's important for production. It plays into all those kind of spaces. I want to come back to something that you said very, very brilliantly, actually, Larry. It tied in with like human error and all these sort of things. When we're put under pressure because of these systems that we have, we start making mistakes, right? And you know, whether we're behind on production, the human error comes into play, and that just makes, once the situation starts going sideways, unless we get control of it and we have values that play into that, it's going to go sideways much quicker, right? So we have to understand how that plays into quality, plays into rework, plays into safety, and all sorts of different stuff in terms of rushing and where these human errors come.
It's got a, I mean, maybe not the best example globally, snowball effect, domino, but like your first mistake, for instance, you forget your phone, so you rush back into the house, but now you trip and fall and hurt yourself, so you cut your shin and you got to get a Band-Aid. Now you're even further behind. Now you've got to rush in the car to get to work. And I think now we can all see that now you got enough hazardous energy that something bad can happen here pretty quickly. Well, you compound that same kind of thing at a place like Hector's, and you can end up with a disaster. But it's rare that there'll be a single cause effect disaster. It'll be a whole bunch of dominoes like the Titanic, right? So I think part of what you really got to do too is you got to make sure that everybody recognizes that the place to stop this is as quickly as possible, not to try to compensate for it by taking an even bigger risk. Like, you know, now you're going to try to go fast with the fork truck because, you know, you picked up the wrong load, and now you're going to try to, you know, make up that time by driving the fork truck faster. Whatever it is, you've got to somehow get people to see that, no, lay it down the first time and go, yep, I made a mistake. It happens. Everybody does. But let's not make this worse by compounding it, right? And I think that part's somehow you've got to be able to give everybody that break. But it's different than the stop work authority when somebody is deliberately doing something unsafe, like, I'm not going to do this because you're not sure in the trench, I'm stopping work. That's, you know, it's a little different, much more subtle. Anyhow, sorry, Teg, but I think people ignore the subtlety in safety, like the personal subtlety daily. Like, we all have about 20 little mistakes we're going to make, 30 every day. But you add some rushing and some fatigue to that, you can bump that number up to 60.
Absolutely. And then I guess the last 2 points that I picked up on, David said something that that I think is important that we didn't maybe drill down into, which is safety is sometimes perceived as an outcome. And for a lot of organizations, that can be problematic, right? Because then it gets reduced down to just a metric. And I know those metrics are important, but, you know, do we look at those leading metrics too? Because it's too easy to fall into the trap of we're just looking at lagging metrics, right? So are we aware of those kind of cultural pieces that are leading metrics? Do we use that information to get those messages out? And because that plays into, again, something that David was talking about, the perception, unintended messages, right? Which can, again, go back to where we started this, which is you have to have that alignment. And if you don't have that alignment and that understanding through all the different subtleties of all the different areas we've been talking about, it becomes very, very difficult to achieve. But if you get that alignment and it's good and it's tight, then you put yourself in a very, very strong position to achieve it.
Any take it, I mean, again, it's really putting you on the spot. I mean,
That's okay.
Well, no, but I mean, I think to achieve that alignment, it's got a bit of the bell on the cat thing, though. In other words, we'd be able to hear the cat a lot better if there was a bell around it. So everybody agrees that that'll work. But the problem is actually getting the cat around the bell around, the cat,
The
right?
cat in
Like,
the first place.
any tips for us on, efficient ways to get to that integration? And I'll then bounce that same question off of David and Hector and Keith, and we'll wrap up. What have you seen, like, to help them see?
Yeah.
Like, I was thinking, the first thing and it was one of the questions is to get with some of the production people and the quality people and just look at a couple of metrics that would be directly affected by human error.
Yep.
And start tracking that kind of stuff. Like I mentioned one already, shipping errors, but you could have also, like, incorrect invoices or things like that from your finance department. But you could try to get people to see the connection.
Yes.
And then the integration would likely be much easier. Although, I want to ask David and Hector too, and Keith. But any other ideas? Any other ideas? Okay.
Super quick. I think you're right. And actually, and if you look at certainly what actually a lot of stuff that I've been doing recently is showing exactly that to the senior leaders, right? So they understand how human error is affecting their safety. They understand, then you then expand the conversation, look how it's affecting your quality, right? And quality gets a lot of attention because quality is a lot of money for a lot of organizations, right? And then you have a root cause conversation, and you realize that a lot of the root causes are the same. You've been talking about that when you talk about rushing, and how all these states cause people to make these unintended errors, and then suddenly you find yourself having a very, very different conversation. So then you find yourself, right, now I understand the scale of the problem, and we have to view it strategically as opposed to tactically, right? And what are we going to do about it? Well, there's this that needs to happen at a leadership level. There's this that needs to happen from a systems perspective. This needs to happen on the front line, and this needs to happen on the supervisors. And when you make that step, it's actually a fairly easy conversation to have, actually, because it stares you straight in the face.
Well, I found that all I have to do is if I can just set the stage with one thing further and say, guys, we all make mistakes, obviously. And we tend to make, more mistakes when we're learning something. It's part of the learning process, whether it's a sport or a musical instrument or a language, you're likely going to hit a wrong note. But we also make mistakes when we aren't learning, when we know how to do things well. And everybody has to agree with that. But then you just ask one more question, and normally now the whole thing starts to fall into place. What percentage of your day or your week do you get to spend doing something new or learning something new versus doing what you know how to do well? Like get up, make coffee, brush your teeth, shower, get dressed, drive to work. Do you need to ask anybody directions on how to get to work? And once you get to work and you say, hey, Fred, how's it going? How likely is it you're going to hear same old from Fred? So most people will readily admit that 95% of their day or their week, they are doing things that they know how to do well, quite often well enough that they can do them on autopilot. So now the next question is, why do you make mistakes when you know how to do something well, other than rushing, frustration, fatigue, complacency, or a combination of those states? And if I can just get a chance to get the contractors and the managers to just see that much, then I can usually get them to see that, wait a minute, we could kill an awful lot of birds with one stone here, that it's the same inner gear. And I think that part helps set like the integration more than anything else. If they can just see that one fundamental thing about how much do you spend learning something new, and then, well, of the things you know how to do well, what else is there? I mean, there's extreme joy and there's extreme sorrow, but you've all heard me make this joke. I've been in an awful lot of workplaces. You don't get too many workers saying, that extreme joy problem you're talking about, Larry, that's what's killing us here. So, for most of us, it's rushing, frustration, fatigue, complacency, or a combination on a daily basis is 95% of all the mistakes we make. And so, then you could try to get the company to sort of go, okay, that all now makes sense. And then we can spoke out from that and compensate from it, like you were saying, Keith, and get people to understand that this is going to happen. If they tell you it isn't, they're just pretending. So why don't we do something about the risk that will happen before it happens? And David, that's what you said you guys were doing, really. Like, hey, a preemptive strike, it's going to happen. We will find ourselves without a part. And this is what happens when you do, so that you don't run around like a chicken with your head cut off. Now, Hector, what other final tips could you give for the folks out there, especially those that are dealing with contractors, which is almost everybody listening is going to be dealing with contractors over the next year or two somewhere. So any kind of final, if they were only going to remember one thing, what would you tell them that one thing was, Hector?
I think the one thing is to connect the safety management system that you have with the daily life of the worker in the field to make the management system to be meaningful for him. So he need to understand what is the 1, 2, 3 factors that he have to take care to keep himself safe, to keep safe also his partner, his person working with close to him, so all his peers in his group. I think that if you can translate the information.
Excellent point, Hector. Sorry,
Yep.
I didn't mean to interrupt, Hector. It's an excellent point, though. Really, I think I know Keith's nodding at that as soon as he said that you got it. That more than anything, I believe that's key, and we hadn't really talked too much about that.
You know that David was saying something that actually is the making the safety professionals to understand how the company make money. So how this business is going. To make safety also to understand the urgency, the emergencies, why we need to do something. What is the reason that you need to right now to expedite something? So I think that those are the different level of languages, the language that the safety professional need to connect in the different level of the organization. We need to speak in the same level, on the same frequency with the management to understand why they need to get this done today. And when that happens, he need to activate his organization to get this done because it's crucial for the project or for the organization. But also then the safety professional have to go to the bottom to translate all these sophisticated terms and whatever is happening in the top and translate this in a very simple instruction to the worker, that every worker understand what is expecting from him. I think that's the key.
Larry, I've got to add to what Hector said there. And this is the problem with a lot of safety professionals, and something that is trying to be driven through the UK is getting safety professionals to that top table and saying to the safety professional, can you run a business? Because you'll see a director in a business that might be the director of customer services, and the CEO go, right, you're now director of operations. Because if you're a good director, you can manage people and you have experts underneath you. And I see Ted noggin there, but you've got safety professionals, and you can't say to a safety professional, now go run my commercial department, now go run my customer services department. I'm fortunate that I've come through that route of customer services, commercial, and then I retrained to do safety. So therefore I've got that more holistic view. But absolutely, just to really give it back to you, Larry, is we do need to get safety professionals. They have to understand the job, but they've got to understand the job the guys do on the ground, but they've also got to understand how does a company run? Because as you said, if we want to be safe, if safety is a priority, we don't get out of bed in the morning because then we're safe. But we're not. We're in business to be in business. So safety has to be the value. Our job every day is to make widgets. My job when I worked in production was to get widgets to go out the door. It wasn't to do safety. My job and everyone's job in that company is to produce what the company produces. But we do it in different ways. But we need to suddenly get that shift that as a safety professional, I'm not there to do safety. If my company makes aircraft seats, my job is to make aircraft seats go out the door because that's what money and that's what makes the business. But by God, we will do it with getting everyone home safe at the end of every single day.
Well, I think that's the challenge. I mean, I'm also big on getting them back to work safely the next day too, since more of them perish in that time period. And I remember Kevin Cobb used to say this all the time: if you really wanted them not to get hurt, you'd never let them go home. Teg, just to sum this up, anybody want to last remarks? We gotta blast off, but anything?
Yep. One quick one I have, and mine is simple. As a safety professional, you're more of a teacher and a guide and a leader, upward and downward, as opposed to being an adjudicator. Too much adjudication on wrong behavior, not enough enforcement and care towards right behavior. If a guy's not wearing a mask, find out why. Don't just say, hey, put it on, it's the rule. You really need to get to that level, because otherwise it hurts the profession, it hurts the value of safety, and you don't end up making any advancement in the organization.
And I think you were sort of saying that as well too, Hector? That you've got to make that connection right at the beginning with the people, with the people and also with the contractors. But you're also saying, same as David, understanding the business. Don't default to the law. Talk about this is all part of the same process. You've just got to see that it's integrated. And like I said, I think the easiest way to do it is to just go look for a couple of places where human error would obviously be a factor in terms of performance, and start tracking it, do an intervention, show some improvement, and get them to see that it's all coming from the same. Like, we know nobody's ever trying to get hurt, but do you really think anybody's ever trying to make a quality problem? Or make an accounting error and send out an invoice with the decimal? Nobody is, right? So it's intuitively, to me, it doesn't make sense that safety ever did get separated. But I think because the hazards got pretty technical, it needed to be specialized. And I think that's where this layering or this dichotomy started, that safety was somehow separate from it all, instead of it's sort of part of it all, right? Go tell your grandmother, watch what you do, think about what you do, that's really important for safety. And she's going to look at you and go, really, Larry? You figured that all out by yourself, did you? And yet, because of the technical component of safety, somehow the human error component got overlooked until, we're now at this stage where that's just about all that's left, right? And gentlemen, I'm going to just introduce the next show, because it is sort of the segue to it. The next frontier, or the last frontier, as I call it, which is driving or vehicular safety. Now, this has been something that I find more than interesting or curious. It's a bit tragic. Almost every company that we work for, they have an issue with vehicular fatalities, fender benders, very serious injuries caused in car crashes. And yet, because it's not occupational health and safety, there has been a great reluctance for companies to grab the bull by the horns and do something about vehicular safety. I mean, to give you an idea how significant this is, many of the delivery companies and trucking companies that have installed devices in the car, the proverbial black box that tracks rapid acceleration, rapid deceleration, how much idle time and gas wasting you're doing, so how much you're wrecking the brakes, how much you waste in gas, vehicle efficiency. They can track an awful lot of safety things as well with it, but that's not why the people buy them. The people are buying them to save gas and to save brakes and on maintenance. That's basically their MO in those businesses. I've kind of worked, I know some people in it. But anyhow, it's why is that? Why is it that we know that 40% of the fatalities are coming from the highway, and a huge percentage of them in plant are coming from mobile pieces of equipment like fork trucks, genie booms, motorized pallet movers and earth movers and things like that out in the construction sites, but a great reluctance to tackle vehicular safety. So this next session, expert panel webinar, is going to be on the 6th of May, and like 2 months from now, and it will be on what are leading companies doing with vehicular safety that is actually working. And hopefully everybody listening will be able to get some great ideas that they would like to be willing to pass along to their workforce. And hopefully we can start making a little bit more improvement in this area, which is, it's significant. And I realize there's issues tackling it, but there's more issues not tackling it, you guys. There's people dying, there's people getting seriously hurt, and every one of the companies we work with, we know it. So hopefully we can provide some information that'll help people with that. So everybody, thank you very much for watching or listening. Panel, thank you very much. Hector, again, thanks for being up past midnight. David, Keith, Teg, thank you all very much. And hopefully you can all join us in a couple months where, like I said, we'll be tackling driving safety, the last frontier. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks all. Take care. Stay safe and well.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.